Welcome to CozySideAudio, where every story pulls you deeper. If you like the thrill, the mystery, and the chase, like, share, and subscribe before the next clue disappears.
CozySideAudio presents Ink Between Worlds. Chapter 1. The Blank Between. The sea kept time for her. Every morning, it breathed against the cliffs below Isola Vale's cottage, exhaling mist through the open window where her desk sat waiting. She had placed it there deliberately, between the horizon and her imagination, as if the two might one day meet. The desk itself was small, old pine, a little warped from the years. The lamp on its corner flickered like a tired star. Beside it sat her ritual, a cup of cold tea, an open notebook, and a fountain pen filled with deep violet ink that she'd bought for luck but never used for anything ordinary. Tonight, she had decided, she would begin. The page had been waiting for her too long. Isola had spent the last week doing everything except writing, straightening the shelves, rearranging books by colour, sharpening pencils that she never used. Each avoidance felt like a small prayer for courage. But now, as the sea whispered below and the clouds bruised with dusk, she felt the first spark of readiness, fragile, trembling, real. She took up her pen, uncaptured it, and hesitated. The silence around her was a living thing. The lamp hummed. Outside, the waves shushed and retreated. Somewhere far inland, a train moaned like a ghost. And then came that first pulse of terror, the one every writer knew, the blank page staring back with all its possible failures. She breathed once, deeply, and touched the pen to paper. The angel fell through, a sky too bright to forgive her. The words came easily, a gift. She felt the rhythm of them before she understood their meaning. They shimmered faintly on the page like wet paint catching light. She stared, heart thudding, as if she'd opened a door she wasn't entirely ready to walk through. Isola whispered the line aloud, tasting it. It was a strange comfort to hear it in her own voice, the sound of creation. She sat back and looked at the single sentence, a fragile bridge into a world not yet built. Caliph. That was the name that had come to her days ago, while washing dishes, when sunlight refracted through the glass and made her think of wings. She didn't know where the name had come from, it simply was, arriving complete. Names were like that sometimes, gifts from the deep part of her mind, the one that spoke in symbols instead of words. Caliph, the angel who fell. And Mirathar, the realm she'd fallen into. The map of Mirathar still lay unfinished on her drafting table by the window, half smudged from her fingertips. Rivers like veins, mountains like the bones of a sleeping god. When she glanced at it, she almost thought she saw it move the coastline, flexing, the forests breathing. She blinked and it was still again, the ink harmless and still wet in places. That would come later, she reminded herself. The geography, the law, the scaffolding of story. Tonight she only needed to begin. And yet something in her resisted moving forward, a kind of quiet reverence, as though writing another word might disturb a sleeping creature. She looked down at the sentence again. The ink gleamed faintly in the lamplight. The angel fell through a sky too bright to forgive her. Too bright, she murmured. But forgiving what? She turned the question over in her head like a smooth stone. There it was again, that hush of magic that sometimes came to her at the start of a new work. The sense that she wasn't inventing but remembering, as if the story already existed somewhere and her task was only to find the right way back to it. She wrote another line, slower this time. Her wings burned as she fell, feathers turned to ash before they reached the sea. She paused. The room felt warmer suddenly, the air dense. She could almost smell smoke, faint and distant, as though something invisible was smouldering in the walls. She turned in her chair, scanning the shadows. Nothing, only the sea and the night. Still, when she looked back at her notebook, a small curl of black ash lay across the page. She brushed it away, heart quickening. It was only dust, she told herself, just candle soot. And yet, when she looked out the window again, She thought she saw a figure standing on the rocks below, dark against the waves, wings folded, staring up at her window. She blinked, and it was gone. Isola exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. It was the fatigue, surely. She hadn't slept properly in days, too tangled up in notes and ideas and the strange pressure of wanting to make something true. She closed her notebook gently, almost ceremonially, and whispered, "Tomorrow, then." But tomorrow came sooner than she expected. That night, sleep took her quickly. The rain came in soft, persistent sheets, whispering against the glass. Her dreams began where her words had ended. She stood on a cliff overlooking an endless sea, sky blazing white above her so bright it hurt. Ash fell like snow, and there, lying at the edge of the tide, was the figure from her window. Caliph. Her wings were broken things, half feathered, half charred. The air shimmered with heat around her. When Isola stepped closer, she realized she could feel the sand under her own feet, smell the salt, taste the ash. The dream was too solid, too physical. Caliph turned her head slowly, her eyes like molten glass. "Why did you write me this way?" she asked. The sound made Isola's chest ache familiar, as though she'd heard it before. She tried to speak, but the wind stole her voice. Caliph stood unsteady but proud. "You made me fall," she said, "and now you'll have to follow." Then the tide surged forward, black as ink, swallowing them both. Isola woke with her heart hammering. The storm had passed, the cottage was quiet except for the drip of rain from the eaves. Her notebook still lay open on the desk, but something had changed. Across the page, in her own looping handwriting, were 4 new words she did not remember writing. "The author follows the fallen." Her pen was uncapped, a smear of violet ink staining her fingers. She sat there in the dim light, staring at the sentence until dawn. She felt both exhilarated and faintly afraid, not of ghosts or dreams, but of her own imagination moving faster than she could think. It wasn't the first time her stories had slipped into her sleep, but this was different. This felt less like dreaming and more like remembering something that hadn't happened yet. By sunrise, she'd filled 3 more pages sketches of Caliph's fall, the gleam of wings, the strange geography of Mirathar's coast. Each word steadied her, drew her deeper into the rhythm of the world she was making. The act of writing, she thought, was like walking through fog. The path revealed itself only as your foot touched it. She poured more ink, set her pen against the page, and whispered to the dawn, "All right, let's see where you take me." Outside, the sea answered in its slow, ancient language. And somewhere in a world she hadn't finished drawing, an angel turned her face toward the light, waiting. Chapter 2. Names like spells. Morning came on soft feet, the kind that step gently through curtains and linger on the floorboards. Isola woke to a house full of light filtered through sea mist, pale and clean, as if the world had been washed overnight. The rain had cleared. Her desk was a constellation of open notebooks, crumpled scraps, half-filled teacups. She blinked at the mess and smiled faintly. There was a certain kind of satisfaction in it, the chaos of a mind in motion. She sat, uncapped her pen, and reread the last line she'd written. "The author follows the fallen." It didn't sound like her. The phrasing was older, almost biblical. But it made a certain kind of sense, the sort of sense you don't question yet, because to do so would break the spell. "Fine," she murmured. "Then I follow." She drew a line beneath the sentence and began to write. Caliph's wings, the color of the sea, the name of the first city the angel would find after the fall. The city came to her in a whisper. Erethen. A place of mirrored towers and rivers that remember the sky. The word shimmered on the page. She said it aloud, softly, like testing a secret password. Erethen. Something about the sound of it thrilled her, like a chord resolving after long tension. Names had always been the heart of her process. For Isola, a name was never just a label, it was a summoning. The wrong name could warp a story's gravity, the right one could breathe it to life. She began to list them as they came. Calith, the fallen. Soren, the scribe who remembers too much. Anira, the queen who hides her wings. Mirithar, the realm that mirrors the soul of its maker. Each one carried a pulse, a personality. She could almost see them waiting in some half-formed light, their faces sharpening with every letter she traced. But there was one name she couldn't yet find, the name of the river that runs through Mirithar. It would divide kingdoms, carry secrets, and in her mind it gleamed like mercury. She tried 6 combinations. Lisan, Mirren, Tarith, none of them right. They sat on the page like stones. She sighed and leaned back. "You'll tell me when you're ready," she whispered. Outside, the wind shifted. The sound of the sea filled the room again, steady, hypnotic. It occurred to her then that she hadn't eaten. She stood, stretched, poured water over yesterday's tea leaves, and tried not to think too much about how quickly she'd fallen into this world again. Writing always had that gravity. It asked everything of her, and she always gave in. By evening, her cottage had become an extension of Mirithar itself. Notes were taped to the walls like constellations of thought, sketches of cities, half-legible character traits, fragments of myth. The floor was littered with crumpled drafts. The air smelled faintly of candle smoke and salt. And her mind was alive. When she closed her eyes, she saw Calith walking through ruins, her shadow long across silver stone. She saw Soren at his desk, ink-stained fingers tracing runes. She saw Anira's crown not gold, but carved from something that shimmered like frozen rain. She wrote until her hand cramped. She wrote until the real world blurred around her. And when she finally set the pen down, she realized that she'd been whispering as she worked, repeating names under her breath like prayers. That night she dreamed of a library. It stretched forever in both directions, columns of marble and shelves of impossible height, books bound in glass and feather and shadow. The air was full of murmurs, the quiet sound of words rearranging themselves. In the center of the library sat a man. He looked up as she approached, tall, pale, his eyes reflecting candlelight like old coins. His hands were black with ink. "Are you the librarian?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He smiled, as though the question amused him. "I am Soren," he said, and his voice was steady, deliberate, the kind of voice that wrote history even as it spoke it. "You named me, didn't you?" Isola hesitated. "I think so." "Then I should thank you," he said. "But you must be careful with names." "Why?" "They don't only define us. They open doors." She looked around. Every book on every shelf seemed to hum faintly now, vibrating with unspoken words. She stepped closer to one, a heavy volume with her own handwriting across its spine. It read, "The Fall of Mirithar." "I haven't written this yet," she whispered. Soren tilted his head. "You will. Or perhaps you already have." Isola frowned, feeling the dream shift under her feet. "What is this place?" "This," Soren said, "is the space between your thought and our world. You might call it the margin. We call it the ink between." The words made her shiver. "The ink between," she repeated softly, and the sound of it felt like an invocation. Soren smiled again faintly. "See? You understand. Every name is a spell. You only have to speak it to make it real." He handed her a small book, thin as a breath. "Here," he said, "take this with you." When she reached out, her fingers brushed his and she felt the pulse of something alive, like static, like memory. And then she woke. The candle beside her bed had burned low. Her notebook lay open across her knees. She reached for her pen automatically, still half in the dream, and began to write, "Ashant." In the library of Mirithar, The books remember their authors. They whispered to each other in the dark. She paused, heart racing. The phrase ink between echoed through her mind like an after-image. When she looked down, she realized that her handwriting had changed, the letters looping in a style that wasn't quite hers. Neater, older. Beneath her own words, another line had appeared. The names have begun to answer. The room seemed to hum faintly, though there was no sound. She closed the notebook, not out of fear, but reverence. Whatever this was, she didn't want to break it by analyzing it too closely. There was a kind of trust in the act of creation, the surrender to something larger than logic. And so, in the morning, she rose early and began again. She opened her notebook, dipped her pen in violet ink, and wrote her first words of the day. In the beginning, there was only a name waiting to be spoken. Outside, the tide rolled in, erasing footprints from the sand. And somewhere deep in the dream world of Mirithar, Calith lifted her head at the sound of her name, aware, at last, that she had been called into being. Chapter 3. Cartography of Dreams. The third day began with fog so dense it looked as though the sea had climbed the cliffs to see what she was writing. Isola sat at her desk wrapped in an old cardigan, the air damp enough to curl the edges of her pages. A gull cried somewhere in the whiteness, disembodied. She could hardly see where the horizon should be. The world felt erased and waiting to be redrawn. It suited her mood. She had reached the point in every project where words alone were not enough. The story demanded space, rivers, mountains, the logic of distance. Without geography, even the most beautiful sentences collapsed. And so she took out a large sheet of paper, pinned its corners to the desk, and drew the first tentative line. The coastline came easiest, a curve like a question mark. Then the inland ridges, a cluster of pale mountains. She named them aloud as she worked, tasting each word. The shattered range, the veil of light, the river. She hesitated. Still no name. The dream of the silver river lingered behind her eyes, but no sound she could form felt right. She left a blank space and moved on, sketching forests that looked more like smoke than trees. Her pencil whispered across the paper, and as she shaded the western valley, she felt again that strange thrum beneath her skin, the sensation that she was tracing something that already existed. It wasn't imagination, it was recall. Hours passed unnoticed. The fog outside brightened to gold. She drew until the map breathed coastlines, stitched to mountain veins, borders like faint scars. When she finally leaned back, she felt dizzy, as though she had been standing on a high ledge staring down at the world she'd made. She closed her eyes, and the after-image of the map pulsed behind her eyelids. The rivers shimmered, the forests swayed. Then she saw something new, movement, a flicker of wings above the veil of light. Calith. Isola opened her eyes. The paper was still, but she could swear she'd heard a whisper, a single word spoken from somewhere within the ink. Here. She touched her finger to the map's center. The paper felt warm. That night, she dreamed of flight. Egiti. Not falling this time, flying, gliding over the same terrain she'd drawn that morning. The coast curved beneath her like a sleeping animal. Rivers gleamed like threads. She could smell pine and salt and lightning. Below her, the land breathed. Trees turned their faces upward as she passed, and the wind sang her own name, Isola, Isola, in the same rhythm that waves used when they broke against her cliff. She landed beside a river that glowed faintly in the twilight. Its water was mercury bright, silent. On its bank stood a woman with black feathered wings, mended but scarred. Calith, Isola whispered. The angel turned, recognition flickering across her face. You drew this, she said softly. I tried to. Calith knelt, touched the river. It keeps changing. You shouldn't map what still remembers the sea. Isola crouched beside her. I had to see it to know where you were. Caliph smiled weary, almost kind. Then walk it yourself. The current caught the angel's reflection and tore it apart like paper. Isola woke at dawn, the dream still clinging to her like mist. Her map lay open on the desk. She blinked once, then twice. New marks streaked across the page, fine silver lines running from the unnamed river to the northern mountains, lines she hadn't drawn. She touched one, the ink smudged wet against her fingertip. Impossible, she breathed, but the word felt thin. Nothing about this process was impossible anymore, only unexplained. She lit a candle and studied the changes. The new river paths looked deliberate, elegant, even labelled in her own handwriting. The Mirren flow, born from memory, ending in forgetting. The name sent a tremor through her. Myron flow. The word she'd been searching for. She whispered it, and the candle guttered. The days blurred. Isola began treating her waking hours like fieldwork. She drew by daylight, then slept as soon as exhaustion came, eager to see what Mirathar would offer next. Her notebook filled with cross-referenced observations. Dream terrain shifts east each night by half a mile. Mountains hum faintly, maybe resonance from wings. Soren appeared at the edge of the map, recording me instead of Caliph. The entries read like the log of a naturalist exploring a new continent. And, in a sense, she was. Sometimes, while awake, she caught herself humming a melody she'd never learned, a song the people of Mirathar sang around twilight fires. She wrote the notes down, afraid she'd lose them. Other times she smelled rain that hadn't fallen, or saw sand on her floor, though she hadn't left the house in days. Her world and theirs were bleeding together at the edges. One night, while drawing the mountains again, she pricked her finger on the compass point. A single bead of blood fell onto the parchment. She swore softly, reached for a cloth, and froze. The drop sank into the paper, spreading like red ink. Where it dried, a new mountain appeared, higher, darker than the rest, crowned with storm. She stared. On the map's margin, letters unfurled of their own accord. The blood spire, no map ends beyond it. Her pulse thundered. It felt less like she was creating and more like she was being taught, like the world was using her as its cartographer, revealing itself one heartbeat at a time. That night she found herself standing at the foot of the blood spire. Clouds coiled around its peak. The air smelled of iron. The climb was impossible, yet her dream self began to ascend. The rocks under her hands were slick with ink. Halfway up, she heard a voice, low, rhythmic, familiar. Soren stood on a ledge above her, writing on the stone itself with a quill made of light. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking up. "You added it to my map." "I recorded what was written," he replied. "That doesn't mean you were meant to read it." "What is it?" "The border between worlds." He paused, met her gaze. "Finish mapping it, and neither will remain intact." Lightning split the clouds. The mountain glowed briefly like molten glass. When she looked again, Soren was gone. The thunder echoed like turning pages. Isola woke, gasping. Her hands ached as if she had truly climbed. Her palms were streaked faintly with violet, the same colour as her ink. She stumbled to the desk. The map lay untouched except for one thing. In the margin, beside the blood spire, her handwriting again smaller, urgent. "Don't draw higher." She couldn't remember writing it. For a moment she considered destroying the map, burning it before the temptation to continue overwhelmed her. But she couldn't. To erase it would be to kill something living. Instead, she folded the parchment carefully and placed it beneath her pillow. Perhaps if she slept without seeing it, the dreams would still find her, but less sharply. They didn't. They found her more vividly than ever. She dreamed of standing in a vast observatory suspended between stars. The floor was glass, the ceiling parchment, lines of ink connected constellations that pulsed like hearts. Caliph stood beside her, holding the map, not the paper one, but a version made entirely of light and motion. "Every world begins as a drawing," the angel said, "even this one." The stars shifted, forming the shape of Mirathar's coast. Then the outline folded, multiplied, expanding outward into new lands, infinite versions of the same place, each slightly different, each waiting for her hand. Isola felt a thrill and a pang of dread. "If I draw them all, what happens?" Caliph looked at her gently. "Then you stop dreaming." The angel pressed the glowing map into her hands. It burned cold. "Remember," Caliph said, "the cartographer always becomes part of the map." She woke before dawn, breathless, the first grey light seeping through the curtains. The folded parchment beneath her pillow felt warm to the touch. When she opened it, the ink shimmered faintly, and across the sea she had drawn, a tiny new island had appeared no larger than a thumbnail. It bore a single word in careful script. Isola. Her own name. She sat motionless, pulse loud in her ears. Then slowly she smiled, not in fear this time, but in recognition. Every act of creation leaves its trace. Every map includes its maker. She dipped her pen into the violet ink and added one final note beneath the island. Home. The line gleamed as it dried, and for the first time since she had begun, the page felt complete. Outside, the fog lifted, revealing the true horizon exactly where she had drawn it. And in the space between waking and sleep, a voice she now knew by heart whispered, "Well drawn, cartographer." Chapter 4. The first sentence. The air in Isola's cottage had grown still too still, as if the house itself was waiting for her to breathe first. She sat at her desk, hands hovering over the keys, the cursor pulsing at the top of a blank document like a heartbeat. She had mapped kingdoms, named rivers, drawn constellations of meaning across 1,000 half-filled pages, but she had not yet begun. The story, the real story, refused to be born. She told herself it was superstition. The first sentence didn't have to be perfect. It didn't even have to be good. It just had to exist, a single bridge between imagination and the world that would one day hold it. But she had been staring at that bridge for 3 nights, unable to take a single step. Outside, thunder murmured over the hills. The evening smelled of petrichor and paper, a summer storm gathering like an audience. The windows trembled with anticipation. Her notebook lay open beside her laptop, covered in a maze of words. Caliph fallen angel? Why fallen? And heaven too bright? Or too cruel? Below that, a half-doodle of a wing dissolving into feathers that turned into lines of text. The ink shimmered faintly under the lamplight, as though each stroke were made of condensed thought. She closed her eyes. When she was young, she used to believe that stories existed before she wrote them, that she was just the one chosen to listen closely enough. Lately, that old belief had returned quietly, like a ghost visiting an old house. Somewhere behind her silence, the story was waiting patient, watchful, already alive. She whispered the line aloud, tasting the rhythm before the words even existed. The angel fell through a sky too bright to forgive her. And there it was. A current of stillness filled the room. For an instant, the world held its breath, then the thunder answered, a low and distant echo, as though something vast had agreed. Isola smiled faintly. "Finally," she whispered. She typed it out letter by letter, feeling the way each key pressed into the moment. The angel fell through a sky too bright to forgive her. It was beautiful, uncertain but alive. Then came the next line, without thinking. She fell until the light turned to ash and the clouds to ink. Isola stopped. The phrase clouds to ink felt like a signature, the kind of detail her dreams would later steal and rearrange. A raindrop slid down the glass. Another followed. The storm began to speak against the windows in a language of water and rhythm, thunder forming punctuation. She leaned closer to the screen, reading her own words as though someone else had written them. The cursor blinked after the second line, patient, hungry. She could feel the weight of the world she had summoned pressing faintly at the edges of consciousness, like a door beginning to open. That night, the storm broke open the horizon. Isola lay awake for a long time, the sound of rain seeping through the eaves. Her room felt stretched, as if distance had melted, and she could walk, in thought, straight through the ceiling into the sky, the words she'd written replayed in her mind, a chant, a threshold. When she finally slipped into sleep, she was still murmuring them under her breath. The angel fell through a sky too bright to forgive her. And in her dream, she was falling. The wind was full of light. Each current of air shimmered with silver dust, so bright it almost burned. Clouds rushed past her vast white continents, folding and tearing, and her skin felt both human and something else, something luminous and wounded. Below, an ocean stretched endlessly, gleaming like a sheet of living ink. The horizon flickered with gold fire. The fall was endless, and yet she felt no fear, only a strange grief, as if she were returning to a place she had once destroyed. When she raised her hands, they weren't her hands. They were Calith's, scarred, glowing faintly from veins of light, feathers breaking away like ash in wind. She was inside her own creation. Her wings burned with memory. Her breath came out as light. She could feel the weight of every word Isola had ever or almost written, all the unfinished fragments that had never found endings gathering around her like ghosts. "The sky remembers you," a voice whispered behind the thunder. Calith turned. There was no one there, only the light itself, folding inward. She tried to speak, to ask forgiveness, to ask meaning, but the words scattered before they reached the air. The storm swallowed them whole. When she hit the sea, it was not water but ink, warm, dark, heavy. It embraced her like a second skin. She sank slowly, watching the last light vanish above her, the brightness dissolving into script words written across the surface of the sea, vanishing as she read them. The angel fell through a sky too bright to forgive her. Then everything went still. Isola woke with a sound half between a gasp and a word. The lamp had gone out. Her laptop screen glowed faintly across the desk, her single sentence still there, waiting. Rain drummed against the window, quieter now. The storm had moved on, but its scent still lingered: ozone, ink, and something faintly metallic, like the taste of a key. She got up, barefoot, crossing to the desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the keyboard. She had dreamed her sentence. No, she had lived it. The thought felt both thrilling and dangerous. She knew what dream residue felt like. She'd woken from hundreds of worlds before, but this one clung to her skin. Her hair smelled faintly of salt. When she looked down, there were small flecks of black on her fingertips, like dried ink. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're just tired." Still, she opened her notebook. On a blank page, she wrote in careful letters, "When the first sentence is written, the dream begins." Then, almost without meaning to, she added another line beneath it. Calith fell through the light, and the world became aware. The following morning, the world outside felt subtly rewritten. The storm had left everything sharpened edges, glistening, air clearer than usual. The trees glowed wetly in the morning light, and every puddle reflected the sky with uncanny precision, as though reality had just been repainted. Isola brewed tea and sat by the window, staring at her own reflection in the glass. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a strange calm in them. The hesitation that had haunted her for weeks was gone. A story had begun, and stories once begun have their own gravity. Her fingers itched to continue. She typed slowly at first, letting the rhythm of the storm still echo through her. The words came easier now, flowing without resistance. Calith was alive. The world of Mirathar, once a tangle of notes and maps, now had breath. The first paragraph stretched into a page, then two. By noon, she had written nearly 1,000 words. Outside, the sky cleared blue after the rain, bright but no longer too bright. Forgiving, maybe. That evening, Isola read over what she had written. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. The first sentence had cracked something open, not just in the story, but in her. Every scene, every phrase felt like a negotiation between two voices, the one that wrote and the one that was written through her. As she reached the final line of the day's work, thunder rumbled again in the distance, as if the sky was reminding her that it remembered. She smiled. For the first time since she began this book, she wasn't afraid of the blank spaces anymore. They weren't empty. They were invitations. That night when she fell asleep, she was already falling again. But this time, Calith was waiting for her. Chapter 5. The Quill and the Mirror. The morning after the storm, Isola began keeping a second notebook. The first one, the old brown leather journal, was for plans, outlines, names, the architecture of stories. The new one was for what she called her dream residue. She didn't want to forget the details of Calith's world when she woke, the scent of burnt feathers, the glow beneath the ink sea, the voice that had whispered to her in light. So she wrote everything down before her coffee even cooled, pages trembling beneath her hand. The entries began as fragments, images, questions, bits of dialogue. Why does Calith remember falling, but not why she fell? The ink ocean memory? Maybe the forgotten collect there. She said, "The sky remembers you." Who said that? Who? She wrote like someone transcribing a dream that was escaping in real time faster than she could catch it. By mid-morning, her desk looked like the aftermath of an excavation, papers layered and overlapping, notes stuck to the edges of her monitor, a cup of tea forgotten and cooling near her keyboard. Through the open window, summer air drifted in with the hum of insects. It should have been peaceful, but something in the stillness felt expectant, like the pause before a page turns itself. That night, she dreamed again, not the fall this time, but the aftermath. Calith stood before a mirror of black glass that rose from the shore like a monolith. The ocean around her was calm and without reflection. When she looked into the mirror, she saw not herself, but another woman, pale, human, sitting at a desk under lamplight. Isola. The two of them regarded each other across impossible distance. Calith's lips moved first. "Why did you make me fall?" The voice came not as sound, but as vibration felt through bone, not heard through air. It rippled the surface of the mirror like wind over ink. Isola in the dream reached out. Her fingertips brushed the glass, and ripples spread through her own reflection. Her mouth moved too, forming words that never quite escaped. "I don't know yet." Then the mirror cracked, a single thin fracture that gleamed like lightning. She woke at 3:12 a.m., the echo of the voice still resonant in her chest. The house was quiet except for the rain gutters dripping outside. Her notebook lay open on the desk beside her laptop, though she was certain she had closed it before bed. Across the top of the page, a new line had appeared written in her own handwriting, though she didn't remember writing it. "Why did you make me fall?" The pen was still uncapped. Isola stared at it for a long time, then laughed softly, almost with relief. "You're scaring yourself," she said aloud, though her voice didn't sound entirely convinced. She capped the pen, closed the journal, and went back to bed. Still, the question followed her into dreams, like an echo that refused to fade. In the morning, she found herself writing a journal entry, addressed not to herself, but to Calith. "You're not real. You're the part of me that fell, maybe. The one that still believes forgiveness must be earned. I made you fall because stories begin with loss. Without it, there's nothing to recover from. She hesitated, then added, "But you're right to ask. I don't fully know why yet." She closed the notebook. Outside, sunlight had turned the puddles gold. The world was normal again. Except for the mirror. When she passed the hallway mirror on her way to make tea, she could have sworn the reflection lagged just by a fraction, like an image buffering. She stopped and studied herself. Nothing unusual. Her hair was messy, eyes tired, sweater creased. Still, for a brief moment, she thought she saw movement behind the reflection, something like wings dissolving into shadow. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of waking and writing and dreaming. She wrote by morning light. She dreamed by night. Sometimes she couldn't tell which came first. She noticed that certain words seemed to attract dreams' mirror: forgiveness, light. When she typed them, she would later dream scenes that echoed them, as though the language itself were a form of invocation. One afternoon, while editing a paragraph describing Calith's reflection, her desk lamp flickered. The bulb had been steady all morning, but now it pulsed faintly, in rhythm, with her typing dimming when she paused, brightening when she resumed. She stopped, hand frozen above the keys. The light steadied. When she resumed typing, the lamp flickered again. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, half awe, half disbelief. "You're in this too, huh?" she said to no one, or to the house. It was probably just the wiring. It had to be. Still, she found herself whispering as she wrote the next line. Calith turned toward the mirror, and the reflection breathed. When she hit the period, the bulb flared bright once, then went dark. Her heart stumbled. The room was silent. She reached out and tapped the glass shade gently. "That's enough," she murmured. "No need to be dramatic." When she turned it back on, the light stayed steady, but the story had shifted. Her journal entries grew stranger. Mirathar isn't fixed anymore. The map keeps changing, coastlines moving, cities renaming themselves. Calith dreams too, maybe. Maybe when I sleep, she wakes. When I write her reflection, does she write mine? She began leaving her notebook open on the desk before sleep, curious or reckless enough to see if the words would change again. Sometimes they did. Once she woke to find a passage written backward, mirror script. Another time, a single phrase repeated down the page like a chant. "We are each other's pen." She tried to laugh it off. Sleep writing, she told herself. The mind does strange things under pressure, but some part of her, the part that had always half believed in the magic of creation, knew this was different. It wasn't madness. It was dialogue. One evening, she found herself writing by candlelight, the air heavy with storm residue. She had been revising a scene where Calith touches the surface of the ink sea and sees another life ripple beneath a woman sitting at a desk. The description flowed almost automatically from her fingers, but when she read it back, she felt a chill. The woman does not know she is being written. She dreams of the angel, thinking she invented her, but the quill moves both ways. One writes in waking, the other in sleep. The line made her heart quicken. It didn't sound like hers. It sounded like a message. She underlined it twice. Then she wrote a single question beneath it. Who writes when neither of us is awake? The candle guttered, wax spilled down its side like tears. That night, the dream returned with terrible clarity. Calith stood again before the mirror, but this time the fracture had spread long, branching lines like veins of light. The reflection shimmered, not like glass, but like the surface of a living eye. Through it, Isola could see herself sitting at her desk writing, but her reflection's hand moved differently, forming words Isola hadn't written yet. She leaned closer, trying to read the reflection's page. The letters were reversed, but she could make out fragments. She thinks the mirror divides us, but it only ever showed the seam. Caelith or Isola inside Caelith reached toward the glass. The reflection mirrored her. Their fingertips met. The crack split wider, and for a heartbeat, Isola saw through, really through to the other side, the ink sea, the burning sky, the impossible horizon. She felt the pull of gravity reverse. The reflection smiled. "It's your turn to fall." The mirror shattered. Isola woke gasping, her throat raw, her hands smeared with ink that hadn't been there before. The mirror across from her bed, the real one, was intact, except for a faint line running diagonally across the surface, thin as a hair, bright as lightning. By dawn, the line had faded, but she didn't write that morning. She couldn't. Instead, she walked outside, barefoot on the wet grass, watching the mist burn off the hills. The air was gentle, grounding. She tried to convince herself it was all imagination, the kind that bleeds between dream and day when a story grows too large for the mind to contain. Still, when she returned to her desk, she found a single word written in her journal in neat, careful script. Continue. She traced it with her fingertip, almost smiling. "All right," she said quietly, "but on my terms this time." She uncapped her pen. And as she began to write, the candle flame flickered, just once like a breath on the other side of the mirror, steadying itself to listen. Chapter 6. The Thread of Plot. The morning light came through the curtains in threads. It found Isola at her desk, hair tied loosely, eyes red from a night of half-sleep. On the screen before her, the words she had written glowed like embers cooling after a fire. She had promised herself structure today, no more drifting from dream to dream, no more following Caelith into unplanned depths. She would outline. She would map the shape of the story, its beginning, middle, and end. "Stories need scaffolding," she said aloud, mostly to the room. "Otherwise they just collapse under their own light." She reached for her pen, uncapped it, and drew a single line down the center of her notebook page. Across the top, she wrote, "The Thread of Plot." Under it, she added 3 headings. Act 1, The Fall. Act 2, The War Between Heaven and Memory. Act 3, Redemption Through Forgetting. It looked solid, clean, like the spine of something that could stand upright. She exhaled, relieved. But the longer she stared at the words, the more they shifted in meaning. Redemption through forgetting. What did that even mean? It had sounded poetic when she first scribbled it months ago, but now it read like a riddle she hadn't earned the right to solve. She set down her pen and opened her journal instead. Caelith's sin, not defiance, but remembering. Maybe heaven requires forgetfulness, a purity of mind, a kind of divine amnesia. If so, what does her fall represent? The refusal to forget. The words came fast now, each thought a spark jumping to the next. War between heaven and memory, war between order and chaos, or between mercy and truth. Maybe heaven is merciful because it forgets. Maybe earth is haunted because it remembers. She underlined haunted twice, then paused, realizing how close she was writing to herself. The mirror across the room caught her eye. For a moment she thought she saw movement, not wings this time, but handwriting crawling faintly across its surface, as if the glass itself had learned to write. When she blinked, it was gone. She looked back at the page. Caelith resists forgetting. So does the author. She frowned, not sure why she'd written that. The pen felt heavier than usual. By late afternoon, the outlines had multiplied arrows, loops, cross-references, the kind of web that felt alive. Her notebook looked like the blueprint of a cathedral no architect could ever finish. She whispered each plot point aloud as if invoking it. Caelith falls. She lands in Mirathar, a realm built from lost memories. She seeks the thread, the divine cord linking heaven to the forgotten. She must choose, return to the light, or weave her own world from what remains. The last line hung in the air. Weave her own world. Isola's fingers tingled. The phrase had come from somewhere deeper than thought, a rhythm older than her notes. The lamp flickered. She ignored it and continued, writing faster now. The thread is hidden beneath the ink sea. The scribe guards it, one who remembers every story that ever was. The name came to her then. Soren. She wrote it and felt the world shift slightly, as if the name had found its rightful weight in both dream and waking. That night the dream returned with uncanny coherence, as if the outline itself had built the stage. She stood not as Caliph but as herself, yet she was within Mirithar. The sky was parchment-coloured, streaked with gold veins of lightning that moved like living ink. She stood at the edge of the sea and the water whispered names. Across the horizon rose a figure, tall, cloaked, writing in the air with a quill that burned faintly blue. The quill trailed light, and the words it left behind hung suspended like constellations before fading. Soren, she whispered, and the figure turned. His face was partially hidden beneath a hood, but his eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, reflecting both the sky and her own startled expression. You've drawn me, he said simply, voice calm, unaccusing. Isola swallowed. I think so. Soren dipped his quill into the air as though into invisible ink and wrote a single word before him. Think. It glowed, then unravelled into sparks. You do not think us, he said softly. You summon. She felt the tide pull around her ankles, warm and whispering. You're the scribe of Mirithar. I am the memory of the story before yours, he said, and perhaps after. What are you writing? You. Her stomach turned, as if gravity had reversed again. You mean Caliph? Soren tilted his head. Which of you is which? The question echoed through the world like thunder. She woke with ink on her palms again this time, smeared in spirals as though she had grasped something that dissolved into script. On her desk, her notebook was open to the page where she had written the thread of plot. But the headings were gone. In their place were new lines, darker than her pen. The thread cannot be mapped. It must be found in the unmaking. Each time she writes it, the pattern rewrites her. Isola pressed her fingertips to the page. The ink was still damp. She whispered, What do you want from me? The candle flickered, though no wind touched it. Over the next days, she tried to reassert control. She redrafted her outline, created scene lists, pinned them neatly on the corkboard above her desk. But each morning something had changed. A note would be moved to a different section. A line of dialogue she hadn't written would appear beneath a heading. Once she found her own handwriting overwritten by another, elegant, slanted, almost calligraphic. The war is not between heaven and memory, it is between creator and creation. She stared at it until her eyes burned. Maybe she'd written it in her sleep again. Maybe. But deep down she knew whose hand it resembled, the one holding the burning quill in her dream. Her dreams grew denser, structured. She wandered halls made of parchment, each step leaving ink footprints. Rooms contained fragments of her own outlines suspended mid-air, rewritten in glowing text. In one corridor she found Caliph standing beside a loom of light. Threads of gold and black wove themselves into patterns that shifted with every breath. This is your plot, Caliph said without turning. My plot? Your attempt at one. Isola stepped closer. The threads pulsed but faintly, alive. I am trying to give you shape. Caliph smiled, or maybe it was the suggestion of one. Shape is another word for cage. The threads trembled, unravelling slightly. Without it, there's chaos, Isola said. Without it, there's truth. Caliph plucked one of the threads and held it out. It shimmered with scenes Isola hadn't yet written, a city of glass towers, a desert of forgotten prayers, a mountain that bled light. You think you control this, Caliph said, but every thread you draw is drawn through you. She offered the strand. Take it. See? Isola reached. The moment her fingers touched it, the world inverted. She saw herself asleep at her desk, candle burned low, pen moving on its own. She saw the outline, shifting under invisible hands. She saw the words, the thread of plot, being crossed out, replaced with the thread of self. Then the loom burst into light. She woke at dawn, trembling. Every outline, every note, every index card on the corkboard had been rearranged, not messily elegantly. Where there had been arrows and bullet points, there were now looping connections, phrases rewritten into something more fluid, poetic. Plot heartbeat, theme echo, anti-EO conflict reflection. And at the bottom corner, in tiny script she didn't remember adding, the story writes towards the one who listens. She sat back, dizzy with awe and unease. Fine, she whispered, then I'll listen. She picked up her pen and began writing, not from an outline, but from instinct, following the rhythm of what wanted to be told. Carlith walked through a field of mirrors. Each reflected a different version of her past, a different sky, a different fall. She met Soren again, this time not as a guide, but as a reflection of her own unspoken guilt. The story moved like a current unstoppable, alive. Isola wrote until her hand cramped, until the candle gutters drowned in wax. When she finally stopped, it was morning again. Her window was silver with dawn. She read what she had written 10 pages, maybe more, and found entire scenes she didn't remember composing. Sentences too precise, too complete, as if transcribed from a voice she hadn't realized she was hearing. The last line froze her. The author woke to find her story dreaming her back. She leaned back, eyes burning. Somewhere between exhaustion and revelation she began to laugh. The sound echoed strangely in the room, like it belonged to someone else. For the rest of that week, Isola gave up on outlines entirely. She let the story take her where it wanted, to wars fought in memory, to angels who forgot their own names, to a city where every street was a sentence unfinished. She began to understand that her plot wasn't a straight line, but a spiral, each loop returning to the same question in a deeper tone. Who is writing whom? At times she would wake in the middle of the night with her pen still in hand, words half-formed on the page. Other times she would dream herself watching Calith write her. They were no longer separate threads, but 2 fibres woven through one loom. Late one evening she found herself whispering as she wrote, half prayer, half surrender, "Let me finish it, even if it finishes me." The candle flickered. A soft wind stirred her papers, rearranging them into a perfect circle. Inside that circle, the top page now read, "The story is not about a fall. It is about the descent into creation." She smiled faintly, tears catching the candlelight. "All right," she said, "then let's fall together." And with that, she began again. Chapter 7. The Scribe of Mirithar. The candle burned down to its nub, its flame a trembling pupil in the dark. Isola sat at her desk, surrounded by pages that whispered when the air moved. Her handwriting layered over itself like sediment, the same phrases rewritten in slightly different tones, like echoes fading across a valley. Each time she tried to stop, her fingers itched again. The pen wanted movement, like something inside her hand that didn't quite belong to her. She told herself it was exhaustion, that she was overworked. But she also knew that when she resisted the pull too long, her dreams turned feverish, full of broken quills, wet ink that crawled like veins, and Soren's calm, knowing face waiting at the end of corridors that weren't quite her own. That night she didn't resist. She leaned back in her chair, the edge of sleep hovering just beyond the lamplight. The air thickened. A faint ringing, like a single struck note, began to hum through her chest. And then she was there standing on a shoreline made of parchment again, waves made of flowing ink crashing softly at her feet. Mirithar. The name itself seemed to breathe as she thought it. The sky here was endless vellum, pale and illuminated from within. The sea was black script in motion, each wave carrying fragments of text, lost stories washing against each other, dissolving, reforming. And there he was at the horizon. Soren the scribe. He stood on the water as if it were stone, robe fluttering, quill aglow with that faint cerulean light. When he looked towards her, she felt as though he were turning a page rather than a face. "You came back," he said. Isola's throat was dry. "You called me." "Did I?" He smiled faintly. "Or did the unwritten call you?" "I needed to understand," she said. "The thread, the outline, it's shifting on its own. I keep finding words that aren't mine." Soren lowered his gaze to the sea. The ink parted around his feet, revealing faint lines beneath like the veins of a vast manuscript etched into the seabed. "This is Mirithar," he said. "The memory of all stories. What you write, what you dream, what you forget, they gather here. And you? I record what persists." He lifted his quill and traced something in the air. Letters flared, forming a word she could not read, as if the language itself recoiled from being witnessed. She stepped closer. "Show me." Soren regarded her quietly. Then, almost gently, he said, "You would not survive the total reading." "I'm already inside it," Isola said. "Aren't I?" He tilted his head, amused. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are only dreaming that you are inside your own imagination. Which is worse?" The horizon shivered a ripple through the ink sea, as though something vast stirred beneath. Soren continued, unbothered. "Every story begins as a wound," he said. "Every author believes they can close it by writing. But some stories bleed back. And mine?" He met her eyes, and the colour there seemed deeper than black, the colour of unwritten possibility. "Yours was never closed," he said. "It was merely contained." They walked along the shoreline. The waves whispered in languages she almost recognised, phrases from forgotten drafts, dialogue she'd deleted, the music of revision. Soren's steps left no trace. Isola's left small letters that dissolved behind her own name, fragmenting into vowels. At intervals, Soren bent down to pick up what looked like shells. They weren't shells at all, but curled scraps of parchment, each glowing faintly. He'd inspect one, nod as if in approval, then tuck it into the folds of his robe. "What are those?" she asked. "Salvaged endings," he said. "Stories that never finished but refused to vanish. They hum when the author dreams." She thought of her old manuscripts, half-complete novels buried on hard drives, their characters waiting for resolutions that never came. "They're still here." Soren smiled. "Everything written remains. The words you abandon simply migrate." He stopped then and handed her one of the shells. Inside she saw faint script that rearranged itself as she watched. And then she woke believing the story had ended. She closed her fingers around it. "That's mine." "Yes." "You're harvesting my drafts?" "Not harvesting," he said softly. "Preserving." They reached what appeared to be a cliff of bound book spines, jutting out like strata, forming a natural wall. Stairs spiraled up between them, carved into the bindings themselves. At the summit stood a door of glass, behind which ink moved like smoke. "The Library of Mirithar," Soren said. "Every version of every story that ever dreamed itself true." He gestured for her to follow. Inside, the air shimmered with the sound of scratching quills, not one or two, but thousands working simultaneously. Rows upon rows of desks extended beyond sight, each occupied by figures cloaked in varying shades of shadow. Some had faces, others were nothing more than outlines of light. Each wrote continuously, without pause. Isola's breath caught. Are they? Scribes, Soren said. All who have touched the thread, willingly or not. Her gaze found a figure 2 rows away who looked alarmingly familiar. Same posture, same slope of the shoulder, same hair falling loose against the temple. The figure wrote furiously, unaware of her. She stepped closer, pulse hammering. The parchment before the figure was filled with words she recognized her own sentences, the rhythm unmistakable. It was her, or a version of her. This can't be real, she whispered. Reality bends to the act of writing, Soren said. Each draft of you persists somewhere in the architecture. Each revision creates another scribe. She stared, dizzy. So I'm one of them? You are the only one still dreaming of being awake. The other Isola suddenly stopped writing, her head lifted, and for a split second the 2 locked eyes through the haze. A terrible understanding passed between them. Not recognition, but recursion. Then the other Isola smiled faintly and dissolved into script, her outline falling like scattered ink. Soren led her deeper into the library. The quills scratched faster as they passed, as if aware of her presence. Some of the scribes whispered in languages of light, others hummed. He stopped before a pedestal at the center of the hall. Upon it lay a single book bound in mirrored glass. No title, no clasp, only reflection. The Codex Mirithar, he said. Every story written converges here eventually. It is the archive of echoes. She stepped forward. Her reflection in the mirrored cover moved slightly out of sync. Soren's voice was low now, almost tender. This is where your story begins again. She touched the cover. The surface rippled beneath her fingers like liquid. At first she saw only shifting light, then scenes began to surface. Calith falling from the luminous realm, the thread glimmering beneath the ink sea, Soren writing her name in the air. And then she saw herself at her desk in the waking world, eyes hollow, pen moving with unnatural grace. The candlelight flickered. Behind her stood a silhouette with a quill of blue flame. Soren, watching. Her pulse raced. Why am I seeing this? Because the act of observation completes the loop, he said. You write me, I write you. The ink is the same. She tried to step back, but the book's reflection held her gaze. In it, the mirrored version of herself began to speak. You thought you were writing a story, the reflection said, but you were copying a memory. I don't understand. Soren placed a hand on her shoulder, weightless, but final. You will. The light within the codex flared, swallowing the world. She found herself standing in a smaller room, intimate, candle-lit, a desk identical to hers, down to the ink stains and bent paper clips. On the opposite side of the desk sat Soren, quill poised. This is my study, she said. And mine, Soren replied. The walls began to breathe, the air filled with the scent of old paper and smoke. He gestured to the desk. Sit. She obeyed more from exhaustion than will. Soren dipped his quill into the air again and letters began to fall between them, slow as snow. What do you want from me? She asked. To remember, he said simply, that stories are not escapes, they are returns. He turned the quill towards her. Take it. I can't. You already have. The quill flared and she saw briefly, terrifyingly, every time she'd written a sentence that had come to her unbidden, every night her pen had moved without thought, the quill had been there, invisible, guiding her hand. It wasn't possession, it was continuation. Soren's voice gentled. There is no boundary between dream and draft, Isola. You only believed there was. Her vision blurred. The ink around her shimmered as if gravity were made of script. Then who are you? She whispered. He smiled. The part of you that remembers what writing costs. When she woke, her pen was still in her hand, its tip glowing faintly blue. The manuscript before her was covered in new pages, dozens, maybe hundreds, written in her handwriting, but denser, older, like a language that had matured overnight. Che, the final line read. She met the scribe, and in doing so, became one. Isola sat in silence. Her heartbeat felt like the turning of a page. Outside, dawn spilled through the curtains, pale and endless as vellum. She whispered almost to herself. The thread was never the story, it was the ink between worlds. The pen in her hand twitched, a shiver of recognition. And somewhere far beneath the waking world, Mirathar stirred. Chapter 8. Drafts and Doubt. The days began to blur. Isola no longer remembered when the writing had slowed. There wasn't a single moment, no visible slip, only the gradual thickening of thought, the way the air feels before rain. Her sentences grew heavy, viscous, reluctant to move from her mind to the page. Each one demanded negotiation. She would begin a line, "Khalid stepped through the ash," and before she could finish, the phrase would crumble. Sometimes her hand would stop mid-stroke, as though waiting for permission. Other times she'd press through, forcing the sentence to exist, only to wake the next morning and find the words changed infinitesimally, but changed. A verb softened, an adjective shifted, a rhythm wrong, yet more right than hers. The edits weren't hers. That was the most unnerving part. She could almost accept the handwriting her own that appeared in the margins, answering notes she didn't remember writing, but not the shifts of tone, the subtle transformation of intent, as though something inside the manuscript had begun to rewrite itself to better reflect the truth of what she had tried to imagine. She had lost control. Or perhaps she had found the truer kind. Afternoons passed in recursive loops of revision. She sat at her desk, the cottage surrounded by fog, candle guttering beside her. The hum of the sea below the cliffs felt constant, a low, steady pulse that synced with her breath. Her draft grew swollen with repetition, scenes rewritten 3, 4, 5 times, each a slight variation, each refusing to settle. Calith's story no longer obeyed. In the early drafts, Calith had fallen, sought redemption, found it, and ascended again, a clear arc, symmetrical and tragic. But now Calith refused redemption entirely. Her dialogue had changed mid-dream. Where Isola had written grief, Calith spoke rebellion. "You want me to repent," she said in a dream that felt like dictation. "But you only want it because you're afraid of what I'd become if I didn't." When Isola woke, that line was already in the manuscript, word for word. She reread it 10 times. The phrasing was precise, even elegant, sharper than she remembered herself being capable of. But what unsettled her most was the tone. Calith wasn't pleading anymore. She was accusing. That week, Isola began keeping 2 journals. The first she called the draft, for her conscious writing the actual manuscript. The second she called the mirror, where she documented what happened between. Dream fragments, stray images, feelings she couldn't categorize. The 2 books began to converse with each other quietly, through her hands. In the mirror, she scrawled, "Calith's wings burned again last night, but this time she laughed. Soren told her the ink doesn't remember mercy. I don't know what that means. My handwriting is changing smaller, faster, almost impatient." In the draft, she found lines appearing the next morning that echoed these notes, exactly not quoted, but refracted. The books were bleeding together. By the 5th night, her dreams and drafts were indistinguishable. She would fall asleep editing, wake to find new chapters completed, her teacup cold beside her. She tried to resist. She deleted pages. She rewrote Calith's choices, forcing her back into the intended structure. The fall, the exile, the return. She added scenes of remorse, softened the defiance in her dialogue. She reintroduced the rhythm of myth, the architecture of redemption. But when she slept that night, Calith was waiting again, standing in the ruins of Mirathar's western gate, the sky folded like torn paper, her expression unreadable. "You still don't understand," Calith said. "I'm not fallen. I jumped." "Why?" Isola asked. Calith smiled faintly. "Because I wanted to see if you'd catch me." Isola's heart stuttered. "You're a metaphor. You don't—" "Then stop giving me reasons," Calith said. "Stop trying to close me." The wind rose behind her, scattering fragments of text like feathers. When Isola reached toward her, the world itself seemed to flinch, the air folding into pages, the sky collapsing into script. She woke with her hand clenched tight around her pen. Her pulse was still echoing the dream's rhythm. She opened the manuscript. The last line she remembered writing was halfway through a sentence, but now the page continued. Calith turned toward the sky and saw the hand of her maker trembling. By the next morning, she could no longer tell which passages were hers and which had been dreamed. The prose had grown denser, layered, almost symphonic, too fluid to be fully conscious. When she read it aloud, it felt like hearing a voice through her own throat. Her sentences had begun to sing back at her. She marked a line with her pencil, a passage that made her shiver. All stories long for their own undoing. They ache to remember that they were once thought, not truth. It wasn't something she would have written, not that way. But it was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. That night she walked to the cliff's edge, letting the wind scrape her thoughts clean. The sea below shimmered faintly, moonlight reflecting off invisible movement. The air smelled like rain and metal, and for a moment she thought she heard whispers from beneath the surf. She pressed her palms together as if in prayer. "Am I still writing you?" she asked aloud. "Or are you writing me?" The wind didn't answer, but it shifted subtly, as if the question itself had changed something in the air. When she returned inside, her candle had gone out. The window was open. Her manuscript lay on the desk, pages fluttering as though breathing. She closed it, placed her hand flat on the cover. The paper felt faintly warm. Days passed in a kind of lucid drift. The division between author and story continued to blur, but her fear of it diminished. If the story wanted autonomy, maybe she had to let it. Perhaps this was what true creation felt like, a surrender so absolute it felt like possession. She began to write differently, slower, but with greater faith. She let Calith's dialogue surprise her. She followed the rhythm of what felt right, rather than what she had planned. Whole chapters emerged from that trance. At one point, Calith confronted Soren within the dream. "You think you're the scribe," she said, "but she's watching you both. She's trying to make sense of her own reflection." "And you?" asked Soren. "I am the part she cannot write without becoming." When Isola woke, those lines were already on her desk, perfectly punctuated. She didn't change a word. By the end of the month, the draft was twice its previous length and entirely unfamiliar. She would read entire passages and feel like an intruder. Yet they carried her tone, her themes, her fingerprints. They were undeniably hers. It was as if her subconscious had begun to collaborate openly, using dreams as the meeting ground. The fear turned to awe. When she dreamed again, Calith was there, not accusing now, but walking beside her through the corridors of Mirathar, where floating books illuminated the air like fireflies. The script along the walls shifted continuously, responding to their footsteps. "This world keeps rewriting itself," Isola murmured. "It's learning," Calith said, "like you are." "Learning what?" "To live beyond the outline." Isola woke with tears on her face. Not sadness, something stranger. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. Her pen rested in her hand, still warm. The ink bottle was half empty, as though she had been writing through the night again, but this time She wasn't startled. She smiled softly, whispering to the air, "Thank you." The pages before her glowed faintly in the first light of dawn. For once, the words didn't resist. They breathed. Chapter 9. The Ink Sea. Night is a black tide. The house holds its breath. The desk lamp burns dim, haloing the edges of Isola's notebook in a circle of gold that looks almost sacred, or like the last light of a sinking sun. Her tea has gone cold again. The pen rests across her knuckles, unbalanced, trembling faintly as though with its own exhaustion. She hasn't written in 3 days. Or perhaps she's been writing the whole time, somewhere she can't quite remember. She opens her journal and reads what's already there, her own handwriting slanted with fatigue. The angel's wings have healed, but she refuses to fly. Isola traces the line with her finger, the ink slightly raised, as if it hadn't fully dried. She could swear she'd written that sentence last week, but now the ink glimmers wet under her touch like it's breathing. She closes the journal slowly. Her body feels unmoored, the kind of tired that's not sleep, but distance. She shuts her eyes. The world falls inward. The dream comes in silence. There's no sky at first, no ground, only a horizonless stretch of black that shines like oil and glass at once. The air smells of salt and iron, and when she moves, it isn't on land, but over a surface that shifts beneath her feet. It ripples, thick and slow like liquid. An ocean of ink, endless, soundless. A vast mirror where thought and memory drift like faint reflections beneath its skin. She kneels at the edge, though there is no edge, and dips her hand into it. The ink feels warm, and immediately images ripple outward, a child sketching dragons on the backs of old receipts. The first story she never finished, a girl lost in a tower of light. A boy whose name she forgot, but whose eyes had been written too vividly to forget. Caliph standing on a battlefield of parchment, wings bound in script. Every story she's ever begun and abandoned lies here, alive in the ink. They murmur when the waves pass over them, not with words, but with shapes of half-remembered sentences. We were almost real. You left us undone. She stumbles backward, heart thudding. The sea responds, waves rise, slow but immense, dripping with glistening syllables. The ink smells faintly like the pages of her oldest notebooks, dust, time, and a whisper of grief. Then she hears it, a voice not from the sea but above it. Caliph. Her wings are whole now, silver feathers streaked with obsidian light. She stands in the center of the sea as though it holds her gently upright. You can't free us by ending us, she says. Her voice is not angry, not soft either. It's the tone of someone who has already forgiven and wishes they hadn't needed to. Isola can barely breathe. I don't understand, she says, though she does. Caliph tilts her head. Every word you erase leaves us stranded between becoming and forgetting. You're afraid of endings, but you write them anyway. You want freedom, but your stories only trap you inside their cages. I wanted to finish your story, Isola whispers, to give you peace. Peace isn't silence, Caliph replies. It's being remembered truthfully. The waves pulse, the ink trembles with light. Beneath its surface she sees her unfinished drafts, flicker characters, frozen mid-motion, worlds half-built. The faces blur, stretch, and dissolve. She sees Soren too on a cliff made of parchment, ink dripping from his quill as he writes her name again and again into the air, the letters turning into ravens. He looks up, eyes like dark wells. You shouldn't have come here, he says softly. Every writer must drown once. The horizon heaves. A tremor moves through the sea. The ink rises higher, swallowing the fragments of the world she thought she'd left behind. Isola takes a step forward, toward Caliph, the waves licking her ankles. It feels like walking into her own bloodstream. If I finish the book, she says, will you vanish? Kelith's wings fold, the feathers brushing the water's skin. "If you don't," she murmurs, "you'll never wake up." A pause, the kind of silence that lives in the spine of a story, right before the next word. Isola looks down. The ink around her begins to shimmer, silver veins threading through black. She sees herself reflected, not as she is, but as she was, a girl sitting at her childhood desk, whispering stories to herself because no one else would listen. That girl's eyes are wide and frightened. The sea wants to pull her in. "Come back," it hums. "You belong to what you've written." She kneels, scoops a handful of the ink, and lets it run down her palm. It leaves no stain, only a trace of warmth that feels like breath. "I can't belong here," she says, "but I can remember." Calith smiles faintly, the expression of a creation finally recognizing its creator, not as a god, but as a mirror. The ink calms, the waves flatten smooth as glass once more. The sea holds still. When Isola wakes, dawn has not yet arrived. Her desk lamp still burns faintly. Her pen lies where she left it, but the notebook is open to a page she does not recall writing. Her handwriting, a single line. "The angel stood upon the ink sea, wings healed, but the sky refused to open. The ink is still wet." She touches it. It feels like the dream warm, alive and waiting. Outside, the storm that's been gathering for days finally breaks. Rain drums on the roof like the sound of distant applause, and somewhere between thunderclaps, she hears a whisper, or perhaps just memory. "You can't free us by ending us." Isola closes her eyes. The sound of the rain becomes the sound of the sea. And in her mind, she sees it again, the black horizon stretching outward, patient and infinite. A sea made not of water, but of every word she has ever dared to imagine. Pointe, Chapter 10. Revision. The storm has passed, but the air still smells of rain. Clean, sharp, and strangely hollow. The kind of air that feels like something has been washed away. Isola sits at her desk, manuscript open, the pages rippling faintly from the damp. A candle burns beside her, scentless but bright, its light trembling across her notes. The draft lies before her like a map of another country she once loved and no longer fully recognizes. She reads her own words aloud. "The angel stood upon the ink sea, wings healed, but the sky refused to open." Beautiful, maybe, but not true enough. She exhales, picks up her pen, and begins to cut. Revision, she's always thought, is an act of resurrection, shaping something half alive into clarity. But tonight, it feels more like surgery. Every sentence she changes sends a pulse of unease through her. She crosses out a paragraph and the candle flickers. She deletes a line of dialogue, and somewhere outside the wind sighs like a closing door. She pauses. The air around her feels thinner. When she looks down again, she notices something strange. On one of the printed pages, the ink seems to have faded slightly, like the text itself is retreating. The words blur, then lighten, until they're little more than pale shadows. She blinks. The next page begins to fade too. "No," she whispers, clutching the edges. "Not you too." But she knows deep down what this means. Every change she makes in this world, this waking world, unravels something in the other one. Mirathar is vanishing. She dreams that night, but the dream is fragile, breaking even as it forms. She finds herself standing on what was once the high hill overlooking the city, the same place where Calith had fallen in the beginning. But now, the air is white, not with fog, but with emptiness. The towers of Mirathar stand half-formed, edges dissolving into mist. Streets that once glimmered with glass and prayer are now ribbons of light fading into nothing. Soren stands by the last remaining archway, writing furiously into a book that keeps tearing itself apart. The quill scratches and squeals. ink pooling on paper that won't hold it. "Stop," Isola says. "You'll destroy it." "Mesh?" He looks up, his face streaked with the same ink that stains her hands. "You're doing this," he says softly. "You're revising." "I'm making it better." "No," Soren murmurs. "You're making it clean, and clean isn't the same as alive." The words cut her. Behind him, Calith walks through the dissolving streets, her wings duller than before. They drag faint trails of light in the thinning air. She looks at Isola, not accusingly, but with something worse understanding. "Every time you erase us," Calith says, "you take away a piece of how we remember ourselves." The city trembles, windows collapse into shards of brightness. The sound is delicate like glass chimes shattering underwater. Isola tries to hold on to the dream, clutching the fading buildings with her mind, forcing them to stay, to exist. "Please," she says, "I'm trying to finish. I can't leave it messy. It has to make sense." Calith shakes her head. Sense is the enemy of wonder. And then the sky begins to split. The colour drains from everything. Mirithar, once rich with hues she had never found names for, now bleeds into grayscale. Even Calith's wings lose their shimmer. Soren's book folds into light and dust. She falls to her knees, unable to move, watching the city die not with fire or decay, but with quiet unmaking. When she wakes, it's morning. Her manuscript is still open on the desk, but several pages are blank. She flips through them in horror, whole paragraphs gone, replaced with smooth, empty space. At the top of one page, though, there's a new sentence written in ink she doesn't remember using. "To finish a world is to bury it under meaning." She touches the words. They're hers, but also not. The loops of the letters lean in a slightly different direction, as if written by another hand that knew her handwriting too well. The day passes in a kind of hush. She works without knowing if she's destroying or preserving. She cuts scenes that feel indulgent. She reorders chapters. She changes Calith's fall from an accident to a choice, a rebellion, instead of a tragedy. Each time she edits, something in the air shifts, shadows thinning, corners of her room seeming to lose depth. Even her own reflection in the window looks fainter, as though the act of revision is rewriting her too. That night, the dream is nearly gone. Only a strip of land remains, a bridge of white stone suspended over an infinite void. Calith stands at one end, her wings translucent, her voice distant. Soren kneels beside an invisible pool of ink, dipping a broken quill into nothing. "It's fading," Isola says. "I can't stop it." Soren looks up at her with sorrowful calm. "You were never meant to stop it. Stories end. They must." "But I'm not finished." He tilts his head. "You are. You just don't believe it yet." Calith walks forward, her face illuminated by the last remaining light of Mirithar. Not sun, not flame, just memory. "We're not dying," she says. "We're being remembered." And with that she lifts her wings, and as they rise, the light breaks apart, scattering into pages that flutter soundlessly into the void. Each page bears a word, a fragment, a heartbeat of the world. Isola reaches for one, catches it, and finds that it's blank. She wakes again, gasping. The manuscript lies complete beside her. But the dreams feel distant now, fading like smoke from a candle just extinguished. She flips through the pages. The words seem solid again, ink deep and sure, yet something in her chest aches, a space hollowed out where the dreams used to be. Isola leans back, closes her eyes, and whispers into the quiet. "Did I save you or erase you?" No answer comes, only the faint creak of the house settling and the rhythmic ticking of her clock, the sound of time, of movement, of life continuing. The paradox hums through her like a refrain. Creation builds, destruction clarifies. Finishing is a kind of dying. But unfinished things never get to live. Outside, dawn stretches across the sea. The horizon blushes with the softest pink colour she's never quite been able to capture in words. For now, she doesn't try. She just sits, watching light return to the world she can touch, knowing the one she dreamed will never be whole again, and maybe, for the first time, that's all right. Chapter 11. The Last Dream. Night again. The house holds itself so still that Isola can hear the throb of her own heartbeat echoing against the dark. Her manuscript lies finished on the desk, or nearly finished. The words are there, whole, solid, but it feels like something is missing, something not meant to be written in ink. She hasn't dreamed in 2 nights. It feels like someone has turned off a secret light behind her eyes. When she closes them now, she sees nothing. No wings, no sea, no city of mirrors. Only the still weight of absence. Tonight, though, something in the air is different. The candle burns lower than usual, the flame leaning toward her like it's trying to whisper. And she can't fight the pull anymore. She rests her head on her arm, cheek against the cool wood of her desk. The manuscript glows faintly in the light, words breathing, pages pulsing. She falls asleep without meaning to. The dream opens on silence. Not the natural hush of dawn or the quiet between raindrops, but a hollow stillness, so perfect it almost hums. Isola stands at the edge of what remains of Mirithar. The world is unraveling. The skies above her are no longer blue or grey, but white, blank, as though the heavens have been scrubbed clean. The towers that once spiralled upward are now pale silhouettes. The air smells faintly of paper and salt. And yet there's beauty in the ruin. The light here is softer, almost merciful. A single figure approaches through the mist. Soren, the scribe. His quill is gone. In his hands he carries a worn leather journal, hers. The same one she keeps by her desk, the one she thought belonged to her alone. He stops before her, holding it out. "It's time," he says. She hesitates. "Time for what?" "To write the ending," Soren replies, his voice calm, reverent. "Not to control it. To release it." Aye, he presses the journal into her hands. It feels warm, alive. When she opens it, the pages flutter on their own, stopping on the last one, blank and trembling faintly in the still air. "But if I write the ending," she whispers, "it'll be over." Soren's eyes soften. "You've confused ending with erasure." Behind him the mist parts, revealing Caliph. The angel kneels in the soft white dust of what used to be a marble courtyard. Her wings are luminous, neither silver nor gold, but light itself, thin as memory. When she lifts her head, her eyes shine with the depth of stars that have already died. She smiles. "Right as true," she says. The words break something open inside Isola. She kneels, trembling, the journal balanced on her knees. The white world stretches endlessly around her, the last remnants of Mirithar watching in silence. She holds her pen, though she doesn't remember taking it from her desk, and breathes. When she presses it to the page, the world exhales with her. "Once," she writes, "there was a fallen angel who believed her fall had been punishment, but it was only gravity reminding her that even light must descend to touch the world." The ground beneath her glows faintly. The outlines of the city sharpen not fully, but enough to shimmer, as if responding to each word. She searched for the one who had written her fate, and found instead a reflection. Together they learned that stories do not belong to their makers, they only pass through them. The white sky trembles. Soren stands back, his shape dissolving into ink that rises upward, threading into the air like smoke. And when her world began to fade, she did not beg for more time. She asked only to be remembered truly, as she had lived, flawed, defiant, radiant. Calith closes her eyes. Her wings fold inward, gathering the last fragments of light. The page is nearly full. Isola writes the final line, the one that has waited for her all along. And the writer waking understood that to dream a world is to let it end. The ink dries instantly. A wind sweeps through the ruins, gentle but complete. The air hums a sound both vast and tender, like a sigh that's been held for centuries. The city of Mirathar ripples, folds inward, and begins to vanish. Not like something dying, more like something returning home. Calith rises. The light from her wings floods everything. She looks at Isola one last time. "You did write us true," she whispers. And then she steps backward into the brightness dissolving into the white sky like ink drawn into water. Isola stands alone, the journal still warm in her hands. The world around her is gone, nothing left but endless white. She looks down. The words she's written are fading now, slowly, beautifully. "Wait," she says softly, "I'm not ready." But the voice that answers is her own, calm, quiet, older somehow. "You never are." The page turns itself. The ink disappears. She wakes with a start. The candle has burned to the end, its wick a tiny coil of smoke. The window is open, and the sea outside glimmers under the pale wash of early morning. Her journal lies open beside the manuscript. On the final page, her pen has fallen, a droplet of ink pooling like a dark star. And there, written in her own hand, though she doesn't remember writing it, are 4 words. "Write us true, always." She touches them gently, afraid they might vanish. The words stay. Tita, for the first time in weeks, she doesn't reach for her pen. She just watches the horizon, the place where sky and sea meet, both endless, both always beginning again. Shan. Chapter 12. Ink Between Worlds. The world is very still when she wakes. For a long time, Isola doesn't move. The weight of sleep clings to her like mist, and for a moment she isn't sure which side of the dream she's on. The light outside her window is grey-blue, neither dawn nor day, but something in between. The candle on her desk has burned to wax and silence. The air smells faintly of rain and paper. The manuscript lies open beside her arm. She must have fallen asleep mid-sentence. The ink on the page glimmers faintly, as though it's still drying. She blinks and the world feels unpinned, as if everything around her might float away if she breathes too hard. Then she sees it, the final words she wrote before sleep claimed her. And when she woke, the world waited for her to remember it. She touches the sentence. The ink is warm beneath her fingertips, alive in a way that startles her. She pulls her hand back and watches as the words slowly lose their shimmer, settling into stillness. It is finished. And yet, something within her hums, low and restless, a pulse that feels like another heartbeat echoing from somewhere far away. The sea outside her window is the colour of ink, the surface unmoving. She can't tell where the horizon ends. She stares at it until her reflection blurs into the water's sheen, her face merging with the faint suggestion of clouds. The manuscript glows faintly in the dim light. She turns the pages slowly, reading lines she half remembers writing. Others she doesn't remember at all. There's a rhythm in the sentences, something that feels almost like breath, as though Mirathar is still alive in the pauses and punctuation. But as she reads, she realizes the edges of her memory have softened. The details of the dream world, the towers, the bridges, even Calith's voice, are fading, like paint dissolving in water. She wants to remember desperately, but part of her knows that to hold on too tightly would undo what she's made. Creation is not possession, it's passage. When night falls again, she lights the last candle in the house. The wind presses against the window, whispering. Her journal rests open beside the finished book, the blank page waiting. For a long time she doesn't write, she only listens. The flame bends and shivers as though responding to a pulse she can't hear. Then faintly, like something remembered rather than imagined, she feels the world tilt. The desk dissolves beneath her. She's standing on the threshold between worlds. There's no clear sky, no sea, no city. Only a great stillness, a horizon that hums like paper before it's written on. In the distance, faint shapes waver, spires of white, fragments of light, Mirathar but only as a ghost of itself. She walks forward. Her footsteps make no sound. When she looks down, the ground beneath her is translucent, like glass. Beneath it, ink flows rivers of it, endless and slow, forming the same sea she saw before, only now it isn't black. It glows faintly from within, like memory seen through closed eyelids. At the edge of the horizon stands Calith. She is not light, not shadow, something between. Her wings are folded, her face calm. "Is it done?" Isola asks. Calith nods. "You've given us shape." "And now you'll disappear," Isola says. Calith tilts her head slightly, her eyes glimmering with what might be laughter or grief. "Stories never disappear. They only stop needing you." Isola swallows. "I thought I was writing you, but it feels like you were writing me." "You still don't understand," Calith says softly. "You are what we dreamed to become." For a moment, neither speaks. The ink beneath their feet shifts, forming waves that reflect nothing. Soren appears beside Calith, his form already blurring. He bows his head slightly, offering her a small, knowing smile. "We are not lost," he says, "only resting." Then he opens his palm. A single quill lies there black as night, tipped with light. "You'll need this," he tells her son, "for whatever world comes next." She reaches out, takes it carefully. The quill feels weightless, almost unreal. When she looks up again, Soren and Calith are fading their outlines, thinning like smoke drawn into wind. "Wait," Isola says. "Will I dream of you again?" Calith's voice comes like a whisper within the light. "When you forget us just enough to find us again." And then they're gone. The horizon dissolves, the ink sea folds into itself. She feels herself falling not downward but inward through words she's written, sentences that blur into pure sensation. The world turns inside out. And then she's back at her desk. The candle's flame flutters once and steadies. The air smells faintly of salt and rain again. Her hand still holds the quill, its feather faintly luminous. The manuscript lies before her, closed now. Its cover is damp with condensation, as if it's been breathing. She exhales and traces the title with her finger. The ink gleams faintly. The Angel and the Mirror. Outside, the sea is perfectly calm. She looks down at the quill again. Its tip is dry, yet it gleams as though it's been dipped in something unseen. She places it on the last page of her journal, leaving the faintest mark, a dot, nothing more. But when she leans back, she sees that the dot has spread infinitesimal threads of ink branching outward, forming delicate patterns like veins or constellations. The ink isn't spreading to destroy the page, it's transforming it. Between the faint lines, she thinks she can see movement not of letters but of life. Mirathar shimmering in miniature, and a tiny version of the world she dreamed. A bridge, a tower, a wing, and then stillness. She closes the journal gently. Hours later, the sun rises pale and silver. She hasn't slept again, but she feels peaceful, emptied in the best way, like a vessel that's finally been poured out. The world feels clean. She opens the window. The air rushes in, cool and bright, and carries with it the scent of ink and salt, the same scent that lingers in dreams she can't quite remember anymore. Isola sets the manuscript on the desk, then lays the journal atop it, the quill resting between them. She whispers to the quiet room, "Thank you." No answer comes, but the pages rustle just once as though acknowledging her. Outside, the light on the sea changes. For a moment, she thinks she sees shapes moving beneath the surface wings, towers, perhaps nothing at all. Right, the wind shifts. The pages of her manuscript turn themselves once, twice, then settle. And in the hush that follows, she feels it that same breath that had carried her through the dream world. Not absence, not loss, just the stillness after creation. Chapter 13. The page. After. The first thing she notices is not sound, but absence. No rustle of pages. No murmur of the sea beyond the window. No wind. Only the faint hum, low and endless like breath caught in the throat of the world. Isola opens her eyes and realizes she's standing somewhere that isn't anywhere at all. The horizon has no edge. There's no sky, no floor, no light source, just an ambient glow, colourless yet alive, as if illumination itself were dreaming. She lifts her hand. Her skin glows faintly in the nothing. Ink lines spiral across her palm, faint and silver pulsing softly. They look like veins, or perhaps words written in a language older than memory. She blinks once, and the world around her ripples, resolving itself into a vast plain of paper. Not blank, not written becoming. Each step she takes births faint indentations in the surface like footsteps pressed into fresh snow. Behind her, words begin to bloom, curling upward in her wake, phrases and fragments drifting like pollen. The dreamer wakes in the book that dreams her back. Ink remembers what hands forget. Every ending is an echo made visible. They shimmer for a moment and then scatter, dissolving into the air. Isola's pulse stutters. She recognizes the voice of the page. It isn't hers. Not exactly, but it knows her. She walks. The landscape shifts with every thought. Plains of parchment give way to dunes of torn manuscripts, their shredded edges glittering faintly, whispering in the wind. The air smells like dust and ink and lightning before rain. In the far distance, a shape towers, a pillar of bound books rising higher than clouds. They're stitched together with golden thread, their spines blinking like eyes opening and closing. At the top of the pillar, light spills outward, unfurling like a wing. She knows somehow that's where she must go. The quill in her hand feels warm. It hums faintly, a rhythm that matches her heartbeat. The climb is endless. Each step feels written and unwritten at once. Sometimes the bindings beneath her shift, whispering lines from forgotten stories. She hears names she's never spoken aloud, authors, characters, ghosts all murmuring through the paper. At one point she pauses and glances down. The pillar's base vanishes into mist. Beneath it lies an ocean of loose pages, a storm of unmade tales. She swears she can see Mirathar in the far distance, folded into the fabric of that sea, a faint, flickering mirage. She whispers, "I didn't lose you, did I?" The air trembles. The answer comes not as words, but as a feeling, warmth, relief, forgiveness. No, not lost, translated. She keeps climbing. At the summit waits a mirror. It's neither glass nor metal, but ink perfectly still, perfectly black. Around its edge, symbols spiral outward like a constellation written in grammar instead of stars. When she steps closer, her reflection forms, but it's not her, not entirely. The other Isola looks older and younger at once, with eyes that seem to contain every story ever told. Her reflection moves a fraction before she does, as though she's leading rather than following. "Do you remember?" the reflection asks. "Remember what?" "How you began?" Isola hesitates. "I was dreaming. Of a place made of words. Of an angel." Her reflection nods, smiling faintly. "And who dreamed you?" The question hits like thunder. The ink surface ripples, distorting her face. "I don't know." The reflection lifts its hand. "You will." The mirror splits open like a page being turned. Light pours through the same pale shimmer that used to come from the sea outside her window. Beyond it lies a library that isn't a library. Shelves of air hold books made of pure idea pages that flicker like wings, covers breathing softly. Some volumes whisper to themselves, others glow with memories that haven't yet happened. And at the center, on a pedestal of white paper, rests a single unfinished book. Its title is still forming, letters rising like steam, the page after. Her throat tightens. The book trembles as if sensing her presence. When she touches it, the world bends inward. She is falling again, but this time not into darkness. Into everything. Words whirl around her, constellations of meaning connecting and breaking apart. Every line she's ever written flashes past her, every erased word, every margin note, every breath between sentences. And woven through it all, the hum of creation itself. She understands then what Caliph meant. Stories don't disappear, they multiply. Every story births another, every ending opens a door. And every author sooner or later must step through the one they never dared to write. She lands softly. Ma. Not in her house, not in Miratha, not in any place she recognizes. The floor beneath her is blank parchment again, but this time it's vast horizon to horizon. She realizes she's holding the quill still, but it's changed. Its feather is half white, half black, day and night folded into one. At her feet lies a single line of text, written in neat, careful ink. Begin again. She stares at it for a long time. The emptiness around her hums with possibility, like silence before music. She lifts the quill, hesitates, then writes. At first, the ink resists as though the page is alive, testing her resolve, but then it gives way, flowing like breath. Words appear, trembling but sure. Once there was a dream that thought it was a writer. The line shivers, then burns faintly into the surface, becoming part of the world itself. And for the first time, she feels seen not as creator or character, but as something balanced between both. The page ripples outward, forming texture, light, air, the faint suggestion of a sky. A horizon. A possibility. She smiles. So that's how it starts. The quill hums in her hand. The ink beneath her feet spreads like dawn. She writes another line, and another, each word making the blankness unfold. The story remembers the one who dared to leave it behind. Ink becomes ocean. The dream continues, even when no one is watching. And somewhere beyond all of this, beyond her, beyond the words, a reader turns a page. The world trembles with quiet joy. Hours or centuries pass. The blankness has transformed. The world she's written hums faintly, mountains of paper, rivers of sentences, skies brushed in ink. And at its center, Isola writes still, though she no longer feels the need to finish. There is no final chapter. Only the rhythm of becoming. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, she hears whispers from faraway, fragments of familiar voices. Calith's laughter, Soren's quiet certainty. They're not ghosts. They're memories preserved in syntax, the lingering pulse of stories that chose not to die. And she knows they are writing too somewhere within her, or perhaps beyond her entirely. The page is infinite, but not lonely. It remembers every hand that's touched it, every word ever dared, every silence that followed. When at last she rests the quill, the ink doesn't stop flowing. It keeps moving on its own, blooming outward in delicate fractals. It writes without her. A final sentence begins to form, slow and certain. The author is the dream, and the dream is the author. Then, in the smallest handwriting imaginable, almost hidden in the margin, "Thank you for reading." Isola closes her eyes. The hum of the page becomes the hum of her heartbeat. The world breathes in a long, quiet inhale. And somewhere far beyond her, in another room, another world, another reader leans closer, turning the last page only to find that there is no last page. Just white space. Waiting. inviting, alive.
Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.